Teachers, how do you get your students to confess to things they did behind your back? I teach chemistry at Lincoln High, and 3 weeks ago I started noticing things going missing from my classroom. Small things at first. A box of latex gloves, then a pack of pipettes, then a bottle of hydrogen peroxide from the chemical storage cabinet that should have been locked. I blamed myself for the chemical storage issue, figured I'd forgotten to lock it properly, but then more items disappeared. Beakers, graduated cylinders, tubing from the lab equipment drawer. I started making a list, and by week 2, I'd lost about $200 worth of supplies. The weird part was that nothing valuable went missing. The laptops were still there. The expensive microscopes untouched. Just random lab equipment and chemicals that wouldn't make sense to steal unless you knew exactly what you were doing with them. I mentioned it to the principal, and he said to keep an eye out, but probably just kids messing around. Then I started noticing the students. 4 of them specifically. Kayla, Derek, Marcus, and Jen. All seniors, all in my 3rd period class, all suddenly very interested in staying after school to work on extra credit. Except they never actually did any extra credit work. They'd show up, sit in the back of my classroom for 20 minutes, and leave. When I asked what they were working on, they'd give vague answers about needing a quiet space to study. But they weren't studying. They were watching the clock and whispering to each other. I noticed Kayla kept looking at the storage room door like she was memorizing something. Last Thursday, I left school at my normal time around 4, but I parked down the street and walked back. The building stays open until 6 for sports and clubs. I used my key to get back in through the side entrance and headed toward my classroom. The lights were off, but I heard voices coming from the storage room attached to my classroom, the one I'd been locking obsessively since items started disappearing. I stood outside the door and listened. Someone was giving instructions. Mix the sodium bicarbonate with the vinegar first, then add the hydrogen peroxide slowly. Derek's voice. Then Kayla responding, asking about measurements and ratios. I opened the door fast, expecting to catch them doing drugs or making something dangerous. But what I saw made me freeze. They had my lab equipment set up on the floor, creating some kind of chemical reaction in a large container. But it wasn't drugs. It wasn't a bomb. They'd built something else entirely. Something that made absolutely no sense for high school students to have in a school storage room. The setup was sophisticated, with multiple stages and careful measurements. Professional level work. They all looked up at me with panic, but not the kind of panic you'd expect from kids caught doing something wrong. They looked scared, actually terrified. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands shaking. "Mr. Patterson, please don't call security. We can explain everything. We're not trying to hurt anyone." I looked at their setup again, trying to understand what I was seeing. The chemicals they'd taken, the equipment they'd stolen, it was all here, being used for something specific, something they'd clearly researched and planned carefully. Kayla started crying. She said they'd been coming here after hours for 2 weeks, using my storage room because it had everything they needed and no cameras, that they'd been breaking in through a window in the back hallway that didn't lock properly. I asked the obvious question. "What are you making? Why do you need all this?" Derek exchanged a look with Marcus, and something passed between them, some kind of silent agreement. Then he said words that made my blood run cold. "We're making insulin. Jen's little sister is diabetic, and her family can't afford it anymore. They lost their insurance last month. We've been synthesizing it using chemistry we learned from college-level textbooks and YouTube videos. We knew it was illegal. We knew we could get expelled. But Emily is 9 years old, and without insulin, she'll die." I stood there staring at 4 teenagers who turned my storage room into an underground pharmaceutical lab because the healthcare system had failed a child. And that's when I realized calling security would mean ending the only chance this little girl had at survival. The rest of the story is on my channel or linked below. I stare at the makeshift lab, my mind racing through the implications of what I'm seeing. For a long moment, none of us speak. The only sound is the soft bubbling of chemicals and Kayla's muffled sobs. "Everyone out," I finally say, my voice steadier than I feel. "Wait in my classroom. I need a minute." The 4 of them exchange nervous glances. Marcus starts to protest, but Derek puts a hand on his shoulder and nods toward the door. They file out silently, Jen looking back at their setup with obvious worry. Once alone, I crouch down to examine what they've created. It's ingenious, really. They've constructed a crude but functional bioreactor using my stolen equipment. The setup shows a remarkable understanding of biochemical processes that goes far beyond high school curriculum. There are handwritten notes taped to the wall, chemical formulas, protein sequences, and what looks like a step-by-step protocol copied from research papers. I recognize some of the processes from my graduate work before I became a teacher. I never finished my PhD in biochemistry, but I spent 3 years in a lab that studied protein synthesis. That knowledge feels rusty now, but it's enough to understand what I'm looking at and how dangerous it could be if done incorrectly. When I step into the classroom, all 4 students are huddled together at a lab table. They straighten up when they see me, faces tense with anticipation. "How long have you been planning this?" I ask. "Since July," Riley says, stepping forward. I hadn't noticed her before, must have been in the bathroom when I discovered the others. "When we found out Emily's insurance was being canceled, we've been researching insulin production for months. Do you understand how dangerous this is?" I gesture back toward the storage room. "You could have contaminated the insulin with something that would make Emily even sicker, or created something that looked like insulin but didn't actually work." "We know," Derek says. "That's why we've been testing each batch on lab mice before giving any to Emily." I blink. "Lab mice? Where did you—" "My dad works at the University Research Center," Marcus explains. "I borrowed 3 from his lab. We've been keeping them at my house and monitoring their blood glucose after injections." The methodical approach is both impressive and terrifying. These are teenagers who should be worrying about prom and college applications, not running underground pharmaceutical operations. Jen reaches into her backpack and pulls out a crumpled letter. "This came last month," she says, handing it to me. "My parents have been trying to appeal, but Emily needs insulin now." The letter is from an insurance company, explaining in cold corporate language that due to a lapse in premium payments, the family's coverage has been terminated. At the bottom is an estimate for out-of-pocket costs, $1,247 per month for Emily's insulin. "My dad lost his job in June," Jen continues, her voice breaking. "Mom's working 2 shifts at the hospital, but they still can't afford both rent and Emily's medicine. They've been cutting her doses in half to make it last longer. That's dangerous. course, I say automatically, though they clearly already know this. That's why we had to do something, Kayla says. Jen's family sold their car last week just to pay for one more month of insulin. After that, she doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. I walk back into the storage room, and they follow hesitantly. I examine their setup more carefully now, noting the precautions they've taken, sterilization procedures, careful measurement protocols, even a makeshift filtration system. You're using E. coli as your production platform? I ask, recognizing the bacterial culture. They look surprised that I understand what I'm seeing. Yeah, Derek confirms. We're using a modified PET vector system to express human proinsulin. Then we convert it using proteases we extracted from pig pancreas. From where? Butcher shop on Maple Street, Marcus says. Told them it was for a science project, which it technically is, Riley adds. I run my hand through my hair, torn between admiration for their ingenuity and horror at the risks they're taking. Your yields must be incredibly low. About 15 milligrams per batch, Derek says. It's not much, but it's something, and we're getting better. I pick up their handwritten protocol. The methodology is surprisingly sound. They've clearly studied this extensively. There are annotations in different handwriting showing where they've modified the process to work with their limited resources. Emily's been using it for 2 weeks, Jen says quietly. Her blood sugar is stable again. She was getting so sick before. I set the protocol down and look at each of them in turn. 5 of my brightest students, breaking into the school at night to manufacture life-saving medicine because the system has failed them. You realize what you're doing is illegal, I say. Manufacturing pharmaceuticals without a license, stealing school property, breaking and entering. We know, Riley says, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. But what choice did we have? Let Emily die? I think about the principal waiting for my report on the missing supplies, about my responsibility as a teacher to uphold school rules and the law. Then I think about a 9-year-old girl whose life depends on a medication that should be accessible but isn't. Show me everything, I finally say. Your research, your process, your testing methods. If we're going to do this, we need to make it safer. 5 pairs of eyes widen in disbelief. You're helping us? Marcus asks. I shouldn't, I admit. But I can't just walk away either. Not when I might be the only thing standing between you and a serious mistake that could hurt Emily. The relief on their faces is immediate and overwhelming. Kayla actually starts crying again, but this time from relief. Thank you, Mr. Patterson, Jen whispers. Don't thank me yet, I warn them. This is temporary. We need to find a better solution than making insulin in a school storage closet. But for now, I roll up my sleeves. Let's see what we can do to improve your yield and safety protocols. As they eagerly gather around to show me their notes, I wonder what I've just gotten myself into. But looking at their determined faces, I know I've made the only choice I could live with. My phone rings at 6:30 a.m. I squint at the screen, barely awake, and see Principal Matthews' name. My stomach drops. I've been up half the night thinking about the kids and their underground insulin lab, and now reality is crashing in. Patterson, I answer, trying to sound normal. Those inventory reports were due last night, Matthews says without preamble, and I'm looking at an email from the district about $200 worth of missing lab supplies. Care to explain? I sit up in bed, mind racing. Sorry about the delay. I've been doing a thorough inventory check. Wanted to make sure I had accurate numbers before submitting anything. So you know what's missing? I'm still working on it, I lie, hating how easily the deception comes. Some items might have been used for the AP Chemistry final projects last semester. I'm checking my records, Matthews sighs. I need that report today, Patterson. The district is breathing down my neck about budget discrepancies. You'll have it, I promise. Already planning what I'll write. I can list half the missing items as legitimately used, spread the rest across accidental breakage reports from the past few months. It won't hold up to serious scrutiny, but it might buy us time. After he hangs up, I text the 5 students to meet me before school starts. They're all waiting in my classroom by 7:15, faces drawn with worry. Principal Matthews knows about the missing supplies. I tell them, I'm covering for now, but we need to talk about Emily. Jen's eyes fill with tears. She had a bad night. Her blood sugar dropped really low around 2 a.m. I want to see your setup at home, I say, and I need to see Emily. They exchange nervous glances before Riley speaks up. We can take you after school. Jen's mom works double shifts on Thursdays. The school day drags. I teach my classes on autopilot. My mind's stuck on what we're doing and all the ways it could go wrong. When the final bell rings, I follow the students to Jen's house in my own car. Their neighborhood is a grid of small, aging homes with chain link fences and patchy lawns. Jen's house is neat but worn, with peeling paint and mismatched curtains. Inside, it's clean but sparse, the kind of home where everything unnecessary has been sold off. Emily is on the couch, pale and thin, watching cartoons with glazed eyes. At 9 years old, she looks closer to 7, her small frame diminished by illness. She brightens when she sees her sister. Hey, Em, Jen says, kneeling beside her. This is Mr. Patterson, my chemistry teacher. Emily gives me a weak smile. Are you helping them make my medicine? The directness of her question catches me off guard. You know about that? She nods. They said it's like making the insulin my body forgot how to make. I check the small refrigerator in the corner of the dining room where they keep their supplies. The setup is more primitive than what they have at school. Clearly the original version before they expanded to the storage closet. Show me your latest batch, I say. Derek pulls out a small vial of cloudy liquid. This is from Tuesday. We've been filtering it, but it's still not as clear as commercial insulin. I examine it against the light. The particulates are concerning. Have you been testing for endotoxins? They look blank. Bacterial remnants. I explain. They can cause fever, inflammation. Your purification process needs work. We're doing the best we can, Marcus says defensively. I know, but we need to do better. I turn to Jen. How much does Emily have left of her prescribed insulin? About 10 days worth, she says quietly. We've been using our insulin to supplement, stretching out the prescription. I run through calculations in my head. The school setup is better. We can improve your yield and purity there, but we need a safer testing protocol than injecting it into Emily. What about the mice? Kayla asks. Not enough. We need proper analysis equipment. I hesitate. I might know someone at the community college who could help, discreetly. As we discuss improvements, Emily's blood sugar monitor beeps. Jen immediately checks it, her face tightening. She reaches for a commercial insulin pen, carefully measuring a dose for her sister. This is the real stuff, she explains. We only use what we make when when we have to. Watching Emily receive her injection, the reality of what's at stake hits me anew. This isn't an academic exercise or a moral dilemma from a philosophy class. It's a child's life. As I'm leaving, my phone pings with an email notification. It's from an anonymous address. Interesting chemistry experiments happening after hours at Lincoln High. Does the school board know students are making drugs in the storage closet? My blood runs cold. I show it to the students. Someone knows. Riley whispers, face pale. Could be a bluff, Derek suggests. If they had proof, they'd go straight to Matthews. Or they're giving us a chance to stop before they report us, Marcus counters. I pocket my phone, mind racing. We need to be more careful. No more breaking in through the window too visible. I'll give you access to my classroom after hours. What if it's a setup? Kayla asks. Then we'll all be in serious trouble, I admit. But what's the alternative? Stop making insulin when Emily's prescription runs out in 10 days? Jen looks at her sister, who's fallen asleep on the couch. The cartoon's still playing quietly. We can't stop. Then we continue. But smarter, I say. I'll handle the inventory report to throw Matthews off. You focus on improving the purification process. And absolutely nobody talks about this outside our group. As I drive home, the weight of what we're doing settles heavily on my shoulders. I'm risking my career, possibly even facing criminal charges. But the image of Emily, small and vulnerable on that couch, keeps me from turning back. The system failed her. I won't. The anonymous email haunts me all evening. Someone is watching us, waiting. The clock is ticking, and I don't know who to trust anymore, except for 5 desperate teenagers trying to save a little girl's life. The emergency school board meeting is called for 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. I spend the entire day with my stomach in knots, checking my phone for updates from the students. We've moved most of the equipment back to Jen's house, but there are still traces of our operation in the storage closet. Stains from chemical spills, small scratches on the countertop, the lingering smell of bacterial cultures. I arrive early and find the boardroom already half filled with administrators, including Matthews, who gives me a cold nod. I take a seat near the back, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. That hope dies when I see the agenda. Item 3, security breach and missing laboratory supplies at Lincoln High School. Patterson. A deep voice behind me makes me jump. I turn to see a tall man in an expensive suit extending his hand. Derek's father, William Harrington. I shake his hand, trying to keep my expression neutral. Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrington. Derek speaks highly of you, he says, studying my face. Says you're the best chemistry teacher he's had. He's a bright student, I reply cautiously. He is, Harrington nods, though I worry about the company he keeps sometimes. My pulse quickens. Does he know? Derek never mentioned his father worked in pharmaceuticals until our confrontation at Jen's house. Now, looking at his tailored suit and the Rolex on his wrist, I realize he's not just in the industry, he's high up. I'm the VP of Research and Development at Novacare Pharmaceuticals, he continues, confirming my fears. We manufacture several diabetes treatments, including the insulin Emily Kaufman needs. The blood drains from my face. He knows. Somehow, he knows everything. The meeting's about to start, I say weakly. Harrington smiles thinly. We should talk afterward. I think we have much to discuss. The board president calls the meeting to order, and I sit rigidly through routine business, barely hearing a word until they reach item 3. Principal Matthews takes the podium, his face grave. 2 weeks ago, we discovered significant amounts of laboratory equipment missing from the chemistry department. He begins. Initial inventory suggested approximately $200 worth of supplies were unaccounted for. However, further investigation indicates the actual value is closer to $500 and includes equipment that could be used for unauthorized chemical production. Murmurs ripple through the room. Matthews continues. We've installed new security cameras and changed locks on all science classrooms, but I believe we need to address the negligence that allowed this to happen in the first place. He turns to look directly at me. Mr. Patterson's inventory records were incomplete and submitted late. When questioned about missing items, his explanations were inconsistent. I recommend a formal reprimand and probationary status while we continue our investigation. The board president asks if I'd like to respond. I stand on shaky legs, aware of Harrington watching me intently from the back of the room. The missing supplies are concerning. I begin carefully, but I believe the focus on security measures misses a larger issue affecting our students. This isn't about broader issues, Matthews interrupts. It's about accountability for school property. With respect, Principal Matthews, it is about broader issues when students feel desperate enough to take matters into their own hands. The words tumble out before I can stop them. The board president frowns. Are you saying you know who took the supplies? I hesitate, standing at a crossroads. Behind me, I hear the boardroom door open. I turn to see Riley, Derek, Kayla, Marcus, and Jen filing in. Their faces are pale but determined. We took them, Riley announces, her voice surprisingly steady. We needed the supplies. The room erupts in confused chatter. Matthews bangs his gavel for order. This is highly inappropriate. These students should not be interrupting a board meeting. My sister is 9 years old and diabetic, Jen says, stepping forward. Her insulin costs $1,200 a month. My parents can't afford it since they lost their insurance. This is not the forum for personal hardship stories, Matthews says dismissively. It became the forum when these students felt they had no other option, I interject. They were making insulin in the school lab. The silence that follows is deafening. Board members exchange shocked glances. That's illegal, the board president finally says. Manufacturing pharmaceuticals without a license is a federal offense. So is letting a child die because her family can't afford medication, I counter. William Harrington stands. As an executive at Novacare Pharmaceuticals, I feel I should address this situation. My heart sinks. This is it. He's going to press charges, destroy these kids' futures, end my career. These students have committed multiple crimes, he says severely. Breaking and entering, theft, unauthorized manufacturing of controlled substances. He pauses, looking at each student in turn. They've also demonstrated extraordinary intelligence, initiative, and a fundamental understanding of biochemical processes that most college students lack. The room stills, everyone confused by this unexpected turn. Mr. Patterson, Harrington continues, when did you discover what they were doing? Last week, I admit. I found them in the storage closet with their setup. And instead of reporting them, you helped improve their processes, he says. It's not not a question. I couldn't just turn them in, I say. Emily needs that insulin to live. Harrington nods thoughtfully. My son told me everything last night about your background in biochemistry, about how you've been helping them purify their product, about Emily's situation. He turns to address the board. These students broke the law because our healthcare system broke them first. They're facing potential criminal charges for trying to produce a medication that costs less than $6 to manufacture, but sells for $300 a vial. Matthews looks stunned. Mr. Harrington, surely as a pharmaceutical executive, you don't condone this behavior? No, Harrington admits, but as a father I understand it. And as someone who started in research before moving to management, I'm impressed by what they accomplished with limited resources. He looks at Derek with something like pride. My company will not be pressing charges. Relief floods through me, but it's short-lived. That's not your decision, Matthews argues. The school has an obligation to report criminal activity. Then report me too, I say, standing straighter. I knew what they were doing and I helped them. I'll take full responsibility. The 5 students move to stand beside me, a united front. Do you understand what you're risking? The board president asks me quietly. I do, I reply. But I also understand what these students were trying to prevent. They weren't making recreational drugs or trying to turn a profit. They were trying to save a little girl's life because the system failed her. I look around the room, at the uncomfortable faces of people confronted with an impossible moral dilemma. If we punish these students without addressing why they felt this was their only option, we're teaching them the wrong lesson. We're saying that rules matter more than lives. The room falls silent again. Finally, William Harrington speaks. I have a proposal, he says. NovaCare has a compassionate use program for patients in financial hardship. I can ensure Emily Kaufman receives her insulin at no cost while her family's insurance situation is resolved. He looks at the students. In exchange, I'd like these 5 to consider internships at our research division next summer. Talent like theirs shouldn't be wasted or criminalized. The board president looks relieved at this potential resolution. That addresses the immediate concern for the child, but there's still the matter of school policy violations. Community service, I suggest quickly, supervised by me. They can repair and replace the equipment they took and help organize the lab storage properly. The discussion continues for another hour. By the end, a compromise is reached. The students will receive 2 weeks suspension and 50 hours of community service. I'm placed on probation for the remainder of the semester. The police will not be involved. As we file out of the boardroom, Harrington pulls me aside. You risked everything for these kids, he says quietly. I nod. They risked everything for Emily. Derek told me you have a background in biochemistry research. Why did you leave it for teaching? I smile ruefully. I wanted to make a difference. Tonight, I think I finally did. Outside, the students wait by my car, their faces showing a mixture of relief and lingering fear. What happens now? Kayla asks. Now, I say, we find a better way forward, together. The morning after the school board meeting, I wake up to my phone buzzing with notifications. A local news reporter has somehow gotten wind of the story and published an article with the headline, Students Create Underground Insulin Lab to Save Child's Life. My stomach drops as I click the link, expecting the worst. Instead, I find a surprisingly sympathetic piece. The reporter frames the students as brilliant young scientists driven to desperate measures by an unjust healthcare system. There's even a photo of Emily, smiling shyly next to Jen, with a caption explaining her diabetes diagnosis and the family's insurance struggles. By the time I arrive at school, the article has gone viral. My email inbox is flooded with messages from other teachers, parents, and even strangers from across the country. Some condemn me for enabling illegal activity, but the vast majority express support and outrage at the system that made our actions necessary. Principal Matthew summons me to his office immediately. He looks exhausted, like he hasn't slept. The superintendent has been fielding calls all morning, he says, rubbing his temples. The board members are split on how to handle this publicity nightmare. Is it really a nightmare? I ask. The community seems largely supportive. He slides his tablet across the desk, showing me the school's social media accounts. Parents and community members are posting messages of solidarity. Local businesses are offering to replace the stolen equipment. A GoFundMe for Emily's medical expenses has already raised over $15,000. Public opinion may be on your side for now, Matthews says carefully, but that doesn't change the fact that you helped students break multiple laws. I know, I admit, and I'll accept whatever consequences come my way, but those kids deserve better than suspension. Before Matthews can respond, his phone rings. He answers, listens for a moment, then looks up at me with widened eyes. It's for you, he says, handing me the phone. William Harrington from NovaCare. I take the phone with a trembling hand. Mr. Harrington? Patterson. His voice is brisk, businesslike. I've spoken with our patient advocacy department. Emily Kaufman has been approved for our compassionate use program. She'll receive her insulin at no cost for the next year while her family sorts out their insurance situation. Relief washes over me. Thank you. That's incredible news. Don't thank me yet, he continues. The board wants a formal investigation into what happened. They're concerned about liability, patent infringement, potential contamination issues. My heart sinks. I understand. However, Harrington says, I've convinced them that a different approach might be more beneficial. We'd like to offer those 5 students paid internships in our research division this summer, under proper supervision, of course. I nearly dropped the phone. You're serious? Deadly serious. Talent like theirs is rare. I'd rather nurture it than punish it. There's a pause. And we'd like you to consult on a new educational outreach program we're developing. Your background in biochemistry and education makes you uniquely qualified. After hanging up, I sit in stunned silence while Matthews watches me expectantly. Well, he prompts. Emily's getting her insulin, I say, and the students are getting internships instead of criminal records. Matthews lets out a long breath. That's fortunate. Very fortunate. There's more, I add. I'd like to establish establish a supervised research program for gifted chemistry students, with proper oversight and safety protocols. After everything that's happened, you want to give students more lab access? Matthews looks incredulous. These kids did something extraordinary under impossible circumstances, I explain. Imagine what they could accomplish with proper guidance and resources. To my surprise, Matthews doesn't immediately shut me down. The publicity has shifted the dynamics, and he's practical enough to recognize when to pivot. Write up a proposal, he says finally. Include strict supervision guidelines and safety protocols. I'll consider it. The next few weeks pass in a whirlwind. The students serve their suspension but return to a hero's welcome. Local news stations interview them about their makeshift insulin production. Science teachers from neighboring districts reach out to learn more about their methods. Even the school board president publicly praises their ingenuity while carefully condemning their methods. Emily's health improves dramatically with consistent, proper dosing. The dark circles under her eyes fade, and she gains back some of the weight she'd lost. When I visit their home, she proudly shows me her science fair project on diabetes management. I want to be a doctor, she tells me solemnly, so I can help kids like me. The criminal charges are officially dropped after William Harrington intervenes. Instead, the students complete 50 hours of community service by organizing the school's chemical storage systems and creating detailed inventory protocols that will prevent future theft, or at least make it more difficult. 1 month after the board meeting, Emily is invited to testify before the state legislature about insulin affordability. Jen helps her prepare her statement, which she delivers with remarkable poise for a 9-year-old. I didn't understand why my medicine cost so much, Emily tells the legislators, her small voice amplified by the microphone. My sister and her friends had to break rules to help me. They shouldn't have had to do that. No kid should have to worry about whether their family can afford the medicine that keeps them alive. The room falls silent when she finishes. Even the most hardened politicians seem moved by her simple, devastating testimony. 3 months later, the state passes a bill capping insulin co-pays at $35 per month for insured patients and establishing an emergency insulin program for those between coverage. It's not a complete solution, but it's a start. On the last day of school, I find the 5 students waiting in my classroom after the final bell. They've brought a small cake with "Thank you, Mr. Patterson," written in blue icing. We wanted to celebrate before we all head to NovaCare for our internships, Riley explains. And to thank you for not turning us in that first night, Marcus adds. You could have ended everything right there. I look at these extraordinary young people, Kayla, with her meticulous attention to detail. Derek with his brilliant understanding of biochemistry, Marcus with his resourcefulness, Riley with her leadership, and Jen with her unwavering determination to save her sister. You know, I say, cutting the cake. When I left research to become a teacher, I worried I was wasting my education, that I'd never do anything meaningful with my background in biochemistry. You did something meaningful, Jen says quietly. You helped save Emily. No, I correct her. You 5 did that. I just provided some guidance along the way. Derek hands me an envelope. Inside is a formal invitation to the ribbon-cutting ceremony for NovaCare's new affordable medication initiative, listing me as a program consultant. My dad says they're fast-tracking research into biologic manufacturing methods that could dramatically reduce production costs, he explains. Your input on the educational components was apparently invaluable. I smile, remembering our makeshift lab in the storage closet, the desperate measures we took to save one child. Sometimes the most broken systems can only be fixed when someone is brave enough or desperate enough to break the rules. So, Kayla asks, will you be supervising the new research program next year? Absolutely, I tell her, but we'll be following proper protocols this time. No more midnight break-ins. Probably for the best, Marcus laughs. Though I have to admit, making bootleg insulin was the most exciting chemistry project I've ever done. We eat cake and talk about their upcoming internships, about Emily's improving health, about the changes slowly rippling through the healthcare system. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's progress, and sometimes that's enough.